Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I'm hoping that we're going to accomplish a lot today. Um, Welcome to the first meeting of the Weatherization Workforce Work Group. This group comes out of sort of two different places. Energy Action Network has been facilitating a couple of conversations, one on weatherization at scale, and that's been going on for over a year. And the other is on how we develop our climate workforce. That's been going on just for a couple months. And weatherization workforce seemed to be one of the fruitful areas to dive into first and try to develop some solutions. I am going to share a few slides with you to get started, just to make sure we're all in the same place. And in some cases, I'm going to be reflecting your own work back at you. So I apologize for that. But what I'd like to do is spend no more than 10 minutes sort of doing this context piece, and then spend a little bit of time, like 5 minutes or less, figuring out exactly what we want to talk about. And then going into breakout groups and letting you all, as the experts here, I'm not the expert here, but letting you all have conversations on specific aspects, specific leverage points we may want to be working on in order to increase our weatherization workforce. So that is my plan for the next hour. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and hopefully you can all see that. So tiny bit of context. The Climate Action Plan, which was adopted December 1st, calls for 90,000 additional homes to be weatherized by 2030. The graph that I'm showing you right now shows how many homes we've been weatherizing sort of on an annual basis. So we are likely going to need to scale up more than 5 times the current weatherization workforce in the next few years. That's a fairly daunting proposition. We've had some folks come and chat with us at our climate workforce meetings, coalition meetings. One of those people was Matt Berowitz from the Department of Labor, and he shared this graph with us at our January 10th meeting. This shows the overall workforce in Vermont. So the workforce was already starting to decline before the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, it declined very rapidly. So we are trying to scale up our weatherization workforce at a moment when the workforce overall is declining. Efficiency Vermont did some work looking at this last year and presented their report, I believe, in October of 2021. The barriers that they highlighted specifically on the weatherization workforce seemed worth looking at very quickly. I'm sure you're all aware of these, but they highlighted 5 key barriers. One is the 4-year college or bust mindset that's promoted to our state's young people. The second is a shortage of workers in general, and specifically skilled workers who are willing to undertake the hard work that weatherization requires. The third was wage competition for jobs requiring, with the jobs that require less strenuous working conditions, especially with our current low unemployment rates. The fourth was the historic volatility in funding of incentives and that driving market fluctuation. And the fifth was a shortage of affordable housing for construction workers. There are a number of things sort of outside the workflow that make it harder to find these workers as well. So the final piece that I want to bring into this at this moment is Ellen Kaler from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund joined our December 6th Climate Workforce Coalition meeting. And she gave a very interesting overview of sort of a systems map of the workforce in the state. And I wanted to show you just 3 minutes of her presentation because I think that this lays out sort of the current market and starts to get at some of the leverage points that we might want to be looking at. I think our group found it very useful. So I'm going to show just 3 minutes of this as sort of a final context setting piece.
We have low to moderate workforce participation. We have a high number of job openings and we have a low unemployment rate. So given that, then what would be the leverage points that we would want and policy strategies that might support moving things back into balance where we have a good amount of labor force participation, a good amount of job openings, and a good and a relatively low unemployment rate, which means we have sort of a balance where employers and employees are finding each other. It's supporting the growth of the industry, of any given industry. We have enough workers, and we can move from there. So to just offer up sort of another thing that's very much in development then is we're starting to think about and put some meat on the bones of that diagram to get at, well, what are the strategies for leverage points and strategies when you have a let's just say a low workforce participation rate? What are the things that would, in essence, help people to get back to actually enter the workforce who may be sitting on the sidelines, for instance? Well, one of the leverage points might be certain kind of financial incentives or changing the working age population size. And then what would be some of the policies that would then flow from those leverage points? You could promote recruitment of recently retired workers. You could promote more retention strategies, invest in childcare to make it easier for people to be in the workforce, invest in public transit, encourage wage growth to get, again, people that are on the sidelines into working again. And so one of the things you can see down here, state programs aligned with these strategies. We're still very much in development, and I'm hoping Sarah's going to help us. Sarah Buxton's going to help us with this. Is, what are those strategies and that are in the state's plans already that really align with these types of strategies? Conversely, I'll just do one more, but so we can then jump into our breakout sessions. So right now we have a high number of job openings. So what are the leverage points? Well, we need to do a better job of pipeline development, meaning how do we help people to see that there's job opportunities and then figure out a more clear pathway to actually being able to attain those jobs. Again, working age population size, financial incentives, thinking about what would be the barriers to getting more people into those positions, and then access to upskilling. Again, this is not exhaustive. That's part of the reason why we want to have these breakout conversations, is to think about, for the climate workforce development, we know we're going to be having a high number and growing number of jobs that are needed, thus job openings. What are those leverage points that would help develop a pipeline of workers in Vermont who are interested in being part of the climate workforce? What are some of those strategies that might be able to be helpful? Now, some of these strategies might feel like they're not really connected to the climate workforce, meaning like reducing barriers to childcare subsidies or having an FMLA policy in the state, for instance, but others might feel more like doing more to support people with formerly incarcerated or addiction challenges, or expanding CTEs, career technical education centers, and finally fixing the funding formula that has prevented a lot of more young people from taking advantage of CTE.
Okay, so that was just a little snippet of what Ellen from the Sustainable Jobs Fund brought to our Climate Coalition in December. But I felt like that was useful. Those little wrenches, what are those wrenches that we can start to turn to try to bring more people into the weatherization workforce field? So I put together a little Jamboard, which is it's sort of like a big whiteboard where you might put sticky notes on something and sort of move them around to in a big meeting to sort of figure out where you're going with something. And I went ahead and populated this with pieces that I had heard in former weatherization meetings, in former climate workforce meetings, in what Ellen was speaking about. And I could let you all go with sticky notes on this, but I think it may be more productive just to have you all take a look at it. Let me explain what I've done here and where I want to go with it. So my goal is, in the next few minutes, is to break you all up into breakout groups on specific issue areas so that you will get to talk with other people about specific parts of this puzzle and what we maybe need to start to do to move the needle in that particular part of the puzzle. I have highlighted those parts of the puzzle in green. So those might be things like compensation, training and education programs, recruitment, bringing in new populations, developing wraparound services, and increasing retention within the field. And then underneath those, I've put just a few examples, especially in training and education. This is not a comprehensive list. This is just a few examples of what this might look like. So what I'd love to know from you is, what am I missing? Are there some other big leverage points that we might want to be discussing that are not currently highlighted in green? Or are there some that I should combine? I'm not sure if attention belongs on its own, for example. So before we go into breakout groups, I want to make sure that we're setting up the right breakout groups. Does anyone have any thoughts on what they're seeing here?
Is marketing just like a microcosm of these? I mean, or
I consider that to be
getting the word
recruitment.
out, recruitment, yeah, okay.
But Jeff,
advertising, yeah, I see that. Yeah,
I'd be happy to I don't know if that's recruitment or if the marketing is a different piece that encompasses more of these, and I could either rename this or add another category.
yeah, I'm just kind of speaking out loud. Now I see it says advertising and outreach, whatever you think.
I'm going to combine them for the moment, if that's okay.
Thanks.
This is Sean.
Yeah.
I would consider combining retention and training. They kind of go hand in hand, and I'm talking about that really upskilling is a form of retention.
I like that.
Not to be argumentative, I think they are related for sure, but I also think retention is a really key thing in itself that other things other than training affect. But I could just giving you my input.
I agree with you, but I wonder if it falls in all of the others to some degree. Like, I wonder if wages is part of retention and training education is part of retention, and wraparound services are part of retention.
Yep.
I'm going to jump in here, but I think retention is, you can't lump it in with anything else. It's all of those things, but if it's not purposeful and deliberate, then we're going to fail.
All right, I'm putting it back where it was. I heard you.
We weatherization guys stick together.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that, what Dwight said, because there's one thing getting them into the job. This is Pam Lasser from Resource. One thing getting them into the job, and then strategies to keep them in that job might be all different strategies, and actually we're getting them to onboarded.
Great.
And really retention is a lot of it's the individual employer and whether they run a good, or they're good employers. It's kind of outside of the control of some of this other stuff, but yeah.
Yep.
One thing I don't see here is on the employer side, training employers to deal with the new type of employee we're dealing with making sure that the workforce environment is something that our new Americans and our people from different, cultural backgrounds or just different parts of our current environment, right, that we don't just send people to an employer who has an environment that the people are not going to want to come back on day 2, 3, and 4 with. And I know that like the OEOs have that down, but we're also talking about expanding and having private companies also involved in this, in the workforce development for weatherization. I think that's an important point.
Great. Is there anything else that's missing at the moment?
An area that I think of, and it might not be here, again, this is Pam Lasser at Resource, is who we're asking this question of. I'm assuming, and I just joined in this group today, so I apologize if I'm stepping out. There's a lot of people within the industry, and for pulling from new populations, maybe tapping into some of the agencies that support those people for their answers what do those people need? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the issues in getting their opinions as well? Because we could be guessing from our perspective outside of that, but getting answers from people who are working with those people on the ground.
Absolutely, Pam. You're already on the next step, I think, in terms of starting to look at solutions and strategies for moving forward. And I think that's a really important one, is hearing from potential employees as well as potential employers or existing employers about their needs. Absolutely where we need to go with the conversation. I'm going to, any other things missing right at this moment?
Would human resources support be like under employment development? Like a lot of the home performance contractors, I'm sure, are a one-person show and have a couple of employees and don't have the time for human resource stuff that can really, it's related to retention too.
Yep.
And I think you're probably including this in wraparound services, but I've heard a lot of talk when I was doing my research for the VBRA about mental health resources. A lot of the people are going to be asking to walk in and do this work for $15 an hour have a lot of stressors that may make it hard for them to stay in the workforce.
Great. So this Jamboard can be a work in progress and something we can go back to. I'll provide the link for all of you. But what I'd like to do is now go into breakout groups around these different topics that are highlighted in green and give you a chance to dive in with just a few other people and discuss where some of the opportunities and gaps are and start moving forward. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 20 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer in those conversations, and then we'll come back together and report out and hear what the small groups came up with. There's a certain extent, because there are like 8 groups now, that you'll be voting with your feet. You probably all think these are, or most of these are very important. You probably have some expertise in more than one of them, but I'm going to ask you to choose one conversation to go into right now. If you end up in a room where you have, 1 or 2 people and you decide you'd be better served by going to join one of the other rooms that has a little bit more going on, that's fine. Similarly, if you end up in a room where everyone is there and you want to move to a different room, you'll be able to do that. You'll have the choice within the breakout rooms on Zoom. Okay, does that all make sense? I'm going to show you one more resource, which is our note-taking and instructions resource. I'm going to put this link in the chat. But just so you know, there is space to take notes on each of these different topic areas. It's all just down here if you scroll down, but there are some links that may or may not work for you up at the top. But what I'd like you to do is to make sure that each group takes some notes so that we have that going forward as we move into our further meetings and further work on this. Are there any questions about that as I put that in the chat? Make sense to everyone?
Sure.
All right, you have a link to that document. I'm going to open up breakout rooms and you can choose which one to go to. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone back in about 20 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations. It's always the worst part of the meeting because I'm sure there were lots of interesting conversations going on. And I press the button and then it gives 30 more seconds, so I don't even know who I'm interrupting. Anyway, I would like to give a moment to let people report back on what came out of those conversations. So we ended up with 4 breakout rooms on recruitment, training and education, new populations, and wraparound services. I was in the recruitment group, and wondering if our group could start, and if someone would be willing to give a little report out on what we talked about.
I guess our group talked a lot about that. Recruitment has to be multifunction, multi-age, multi-gender, across all spectrums, attempting to, go after populations of folks that non-traditional employees to weatherization and where do those come in. We talked about, Chris talked about going back to the middle school in science, building and science and the tech tech ed program. I talked some about Essex Tech and how we're having a little bit of success there, but also with groups such as Working Fields, folks who are coming off addiction. Steve talked some about, geez, now I'm drawing a blank. Steve, what were you talking about?
Just more the career trajectory aspect of recruitment. You know, as we've seen and I've seen over the years, people who show an interest, and some of the people Dwight mentioned of these folks from Essex, 3 young women from Essex Tech that are going to be shadowing in their program. You know, their motivations may be, you know, of a higher outcome here, some altruism, some like we're doing something that's better for our climate and for our environment, and making sure that those people who have that interest that's spurring them to show up to these sorts of, you know, opportunities, letting them know where they land within the trajectory of growth in that industry. You know, we can't just plug people in who have an interest, who can take a training and pass a test within the middle of a career trajectory that really requires some more base foundational knowledge to bring you to be proficient at that level of, you know, where they want to plug in. So having a clear, you know, trajectory of career opportunity and growth as a part of the equation for recruitment, I think is substantial here, and a part of how we need to market and promote the industry as a whole, because it doesn't just need to focus on weatherization. Weatherization can open the door to getting into renewable energy. It can open the door into design. It can open the door into a whole other world of things.
I'd
One
like to
other
add-
thing,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
please go ahead.
One thing that we didn't have time to sort of get to was, I was starting to talk about it and I thought that the Zoom fell apart, but it was the time limit, is the gap between the lags that we're going to face, right, in scaling up, you know, getting that curriculum into schools at a younger age and getting people interested in them is one thing, but in the immediate future, like tomorrow and next year, is how are we going to bridge that gap? And, you know, where's the temperature on some of maybe more established contracting industry, larger construction companies, and maybe partnering with some of the training programs that exist like OEO with those companies to scale up that workforce. Some of these companies that have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of laborers already in place, and they have the resources, you know, for some of the overhead that would be involved. But I'll stop there because I know there's lots to go over.
One other thing that I heard was that it might be helpful to have some coordination across the state in terms of some of the outreach pieces, there's in terms of the fact that we're all trying to do a lot of things, but to be a little bit more structured. I think that was much of our conversation in recruitment. Could we have a little report out from training and education?
Hi, my name is Xavier Walter with the BPA, Building Performance Association. We had in our group Jeff, Maureen, Melanie, and Dylan. And we just talked about what we have currently and what's going on in the current marketplace. We talked about what we would need if we could swing a magic wand and give us something that would improve training and workforce. Now, we talked a lot about some of the challenges that we have relative to the credentialing, specifically as it related to the Building Performance Institute, dealing with the training world in COVID, you know, maybe the opportunity in weatherization for some sim training. We also talked about natural gas and how Dylan squares natural gas to beneficial electrification. And I liked what Dylan had to say. And that's it. That's what we talked about.
Setting him up. All right.
I am setting
Great.
them up. I'm trying. Sorry, Dylan.
Is there anything anyone else from that group would like to add in?
The gap is getting butts in seats. I feel like we have the population and the opportunities. It's getting people there. So I think the simulation could really help if we can get to that point, because who knows when COVID's going to end or what will be next. And if we do some simulation, that we could then reduce the time people spend together on site. And the way our program is designed, it's a week long, the first week, and you're in a classroom. It's a big classroom, but it's still scary for people, I think. So we can reduce that first week through stimulation. I think that would be helpful.
Very interesting. Anything else from that group? All right, how about new populations?
Steve, do you want to update, or I can read my notes?
I was going to suggest you do it.
Okay. Yeah.
and
Sure.
I'll add comments as necessary.
Yeah. So yeah, it was Keith and I, and then we also had Kelly Lucci who had to jump off. But one thing that we noted, if we were going to try and reach out to people from those key sort of population demographics that are less represented currently in the workforce, they often are affiliated with certain organizations, but we would be relying very heavily on industry professionals such as those in this call to like make those connections with the groups where ties might not previously have existed, right? And at the same time, they're often getting a bunch of connections from other groups as well that are trying to build the workforce at the same time, just that it is such a big issue right now. So it might make outreach sort of discombobulated all over the place with different people and different aims. But how you can also ease that work effort with different social challenges that are going on for populations. One thing we noticed was like how job fairs really are not that huge of an option right now. Obviously the pandemic really just like took that away from us. But it's how we can sort of regrow those sorts of opportunities. Obviously virtual job fairs are very complicated, and you have to really care about your outreach and direction of how people understand how they can meet with people. But it's how we could try and operate that again. Provide wraparound services. That wasn't our group, but just noting its importance. And then finally, just, yeah, how we can promote flexibility within our positions, just because it really feels like there's a lot of pressure that could be exerted on people that might be entering the workforce. For example, if they were laid off at the beginning of the pandemic and they've really built up their own sort of personal system of not having a job, how maybe they could be interested in a part-time position for like 15 hours a week. But at the same time, if we already have lots of tasks that we would want to help them get going on, it's how we can create systems within our job organizations just to not put that pressure too much on them. Yeah.
Did he miss anything, Keith?
I just wanted to add one point. You know, we spent a little time identifying new populations of potential workforce. And Kelly made the good point that there's a lot of people during the pandemic who have pulled out of the workforce in order to care for children, for instance. That, you know, by providing wraparound services, we can probably attract a lot of those people to come back into the workforce. And we also spent a lot of time working on the younger demographic, you know, how to make weatherization work attractive to a recent college graduate, for instance, how to get people who have graduated from Vermont colleges to stay in Vermont or come back to Vermont after they've studied elsewhere. So, you know, and part of that is to demonstrate a clear career path. You know, you're coming out of college, you're not really thinking I'm going to go into the trades because where does that lead? So in the sense that that's marketing, I think we need to present weatherization work as the entry level to a longer career path.
Thank you. And then our group on wraparound services.
Well, I've got to jump off because I have another meeting, but I just want to say real quickly, we went over a bunch of things. Transportation was big. How people who were asking to enter into the workforce are often the same populations that have problems having access to good transportation. Vermont has got a very fragmented and not very reliable public transportation setup. It's also very broad, big, and not centralized state. Affordable housing. workforce housing. We cannot stress that enough. How can we ask people to get into these if they can't, if they're going to be paying half of their income on housing? Those also included other periphery things like childcare, mental health services, making sure that we have a good understanding of what resources the state already has in place, but are not talking to each other just because of the fragmentation of government. Yeah, making sure that, as I brought up, that we're concerned with not only developing wraparound services for the individual, but also for companies, what we call, or what I've labeled and what we're talking about as job site culture. That whole thing about asking people who are not, I think, what is it that Pam called it? Not GI Joe ready, right? Who are going to go to a job site and not want to come back because the culture doesn't value them as a person. Another one we threw out there was a budgetary help, helping people deal with how to get a bank account, how to deal with getting loans for cars and other things like that, insurance and things like that. Pam had a great idea about tapping into our retired senior population, maybe to help with the transportation part, maybe to help with mentoring and things of that sort. So that's in it, unless I missed something. That was pretty much what we talked about.
Great, that is very helpful. I know a lot of you are going to need to jump off in a moment. I'm going to put a poll up, and I'm hoping that you can all do that before you leave. This is just asking, how often would you want to meet to move forward on this, and whether this is a good time or we need to do a doodle poll. If this feels like a really good beginning to a lot of conversations, and Dylan Giambattista and Gabrielle Stebbins and I, who are have been co-chairing the climate workforce group, will put our heads together about how to move forward and hopefully make some quick progress on some of these, but we'd love to continue having you in the conversation, and are so grateful that you joined us today, and we're willing to try those breakout groups, and we will look forward to further conversation.
We tried to put our notes into the document that you put up, but we didn't have access. So if you change access, then I'd be happy to input those.
Wonderful. I think Matt changed the access. I apologize for not having that set right. But you can also email them to me. You can get them to me any way that's easy.
If you refresh the page and type them elsewhere, Chris, you can throw them in now. But I also took notes from what you said.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks
all.
Thanks.